Skyping in with us this morning on this issue to go in depth is Ed Haislmaier, Senior Research Fellow, Health Policy Studies at the Heritage Foundation. In our studio, joining me right next to my right here is Nick Tate, the New York Times bestselling author of the Obamacare Survival Guide. Nick J. Tate, just to make sure. Gentlemen, great to have you with us. Ed, let's start with you here. Let's unpack all this. What is the goal really here of the Justice Department, aside from making sure that Obamacare continues to exist?
Well, the Justice Department is asking for what's called an en banc hearing, meaning the entire circuit to rehear the case. It's uncertain whether that will actually happen. If that does not happen, there is a split in two of these cases, two different cases with two different circuit courts ruling differently, so it may very well go to the Supreme Court.
Now, we've heard from the Republicans in Congress that the president does not have the authority to change this law. Meantime, the White House says he didn't really change it. He just kind of made some, alterations here and there. If there are going to be changes to the law, there's no way it's going to actually go back to Congress and get changed here. Who has the authority to make the changes needed?
Well, that's the problem. Congress has the authority to do it, but right now, the makeup of Congress is such that you can't get anything passed in regards to this law. So it's going to take some time before, say, the makeup of Congress changes, or members of Congress who are currently taking the position that they don't want to reopen the law come to realize that they need to reopen it and make changes.
All right, we'll bring Nick Tate in here because I want to get you guys both to react to a recent Wall Street Journal op-ed piece here on the legislative history of Obamacare. That piece titled "The Obamacare Chimera, the Metaphysics of Legislative History." The author writes in part, quote, "Let's call it half man, half snake. The administration's claim is that it has the power to alter Congress's creation by ignoring the snake half and deeming the chimera to be all man. That is a stunning aggregation of arrogation of legislative authority and responsibility. If Congress designs a law poorly, it is for Congress to rectify the error. The administration may have a degree of discretion here in carrying out the law, but it may not act in ways directly contrary to the law." Is that what's taking place here, Nick?
Absolutely. I mean, the president and the White House has said, we don't like certain provisions. We think the American people don't like certain provisions, so we're going to delay them. We're going to change them. We're going to modify them. But that is not the spirit of the law as written as Congress established it. The problem is that it's too hard to go back to Congress and say, look, we made a mistake in writing some details into the law that we would like to fix, because the House and the Senate will not agree to very much. There have been a couple slight tweaks that have been approved by both branches of Congress, and Democrats and Republicans alike, but they have not been very many. If you look at the subsidies, which are now being challenged, that we're talking about today, Congress could very quickly fix that problem and say either every state that provides an exchange should give subsidies, whether the federal government runs it or the states. But the likelihood that you would get bipartisan support in both branches of Congress is very unlikely. And I think that's why the White House has moved forward and said, you know what, we're just going to make these changes. And I think there's a legitimate legal argument to be made that that's an overreach of authority.
Fair enough. Ed, I want to get your take here because I've talked to Nick about this in the past. He still thinks it might be too expensive, too difficult to rip the law out by its root and start from scratch here. What's your take?
Well, I think over time that will occur, but it will more likely be done in pieces as opposed to wholesale. I mean, it depends on the future makeup of Congress as elections come. So, for example, talking just about this issue about the subsidies, well, once you start saying, well, we need to fix this, then you raise the whole question of, is this the right subsidy design to start with? I mean, part of the reason the thing is so complicated is the subsidy design is very complicated. So maybe at some point you just say, well, look, Congress ought to substitute a different tax credit design that's a lot simpler, that doesn't require these complicated exchanges, et cetera. So that's the issue here. Once you start, it's like pulling on a thread. Once you start to deal with something that looks to be a problem on the surface, some of this starts to unravel as people start to say, well,
it does, Ed, it does. It continues to feel like it's unraveling anyway, and a problem certainly for Democrats as we move ahead. Ed Haislmaier, thank you very much for being with us from the Heritage Foundation. Also, Nick Tate, thank you for being here for this discussion about Obamacare as well. We turn our attention now from Obamacare to our nation's history in a moment that everyone agrees was a great one in this U.S. country, our nation. That is the lunar landing. We take a look back now during this American moment.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
In 1961, newly elected President John Fitzgerald Kennedy announced to the Congress and to all of mankind America's intention to send man to the moon. Previously restricted to the realm of science fiction, the president's commitment set in motion an unprecedented effort to fulfill one of man's oldest dreams. The obstacles were monumental, not the least of which was to create an energy source capable of sending a manned spacecraft to the moon. The answer stood 363 feet tall and delivered 8 million pounds of thrust, making the Saturn V the most powerful rocket ever built. On July 20th, 1969, Apollo 11, carrying astronauts Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Edwin Buzz Aldrin, circled the moon until Armstrong and Aldrin entered the lunar module and readied themselves for their historic landing. With just 20 seconds of fuel left, disaster was narrowly averted when Armstrong had to manually fly the Eagle away from unexpected boulders to a smoother and less dangerous landing zone. Although the imagery was poor, Neil Armstrong's words came through loud and clear.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
However, the flight was not without controversy. Buzz Aldrin, a devout Christian, administered himself communion on the moon. Since NASA was already fighting a lawsuit from atheist Madalyn Murray O'Hair, who objected to the earlier Apollo 8 crew reading from the book of Genesis, Aldrin's communion was kept a secret from the public. Not so secret was the plaque bolted to the descent ladder on the lunar module. It was left on the moon to greet future visitors and reads, "We came in peace for all mankind." For Newsmax TV, I'm Bill Curtis, and this is an American Moment.